Just when Henry thought the world couldn't get any colder, he saw a man fling a tiny cat across the ice, its terrified cry echoing in the winter air. The sun hung low over the frozen lake, casting shards of pink and gold that glittered off the jagged surface like broken glass. Henry, 62, with hair as white as the snowflakes swirling around him, stood frozen on the lakeshore, fists clenched, breath clouding the crisp January afternoon. He'd only come there to clear his mind, aching from months of emptiness since his beloved wife Marie passed away in the fall. But now his chest thundered, as though struck by lightning, watching that trembling creature skid and spin helplessly across the slick ice. A wave of fury and sorrow crashed through him, shaking loose a part of his soul he thought had died with Marie. The man who'd thrown the cat stomped off without a backward glance, his cruel laughter lingering in the brittle winter air. The trees stood like silent witnesses, branches skeletal and black against the snow, as if they, too, were holding their breath. Henry felt rooted to the spot, trapped between fear and a powerful surge of protectiveness that threatened to burst from his chest. Could he just stand there while an innocent creature fought for its life, alone on that frozen mirror of water? You won't believe the way this story unfolds. It's a journey that will touch even the most hardened hearts, and the ending might just leave you in tears, clutching your chest in awe. Because sometimes salvation comes from the place we least expect, and sometimes it wears fur and has the gentlest eyes. Henry blinked rapidly, struggling to keep his focus as the winter wind howled around him, sharp as needles against his cheeks. Every part of his body screamed that it was too dangerous, that the ice might crack and swallow him whole without a trace. Yet every time he tried to look away, the sight of that small, shivering cat called to something raw and unyielding inside him. Its fur, dusted in snow, glistened like frost-covered silk, and its golden eyes seemed to search for help, pleading silently across the expanse. Henry's breath caught in his throat, trembling on the edge of a sob, the way it had so often since Marie's passing left him hollow and adrift. He remembered the warmth of Marie's arms, her soft voice telling him that kindness was never wasted, even in the darkest of times. And though the ice seemed impossibly far and treacherous, he felt her presence beside him, urging him to act. Could he really ignore this moment and live with himself, knowing he'd watched an innocent soul perish out of fear? He clenched and unclenched his fists, feeling the sharp sting of cold digging into his knuckles like tiny knives. How could one small creature mean so much, yet somehow feel like the very key to Henry's battered heart? Henry took a single step closer to the lake's edge, testing the snow beneath his boots, heart galloping like a runaway horse. He squinted at the ice, scanning for cracks, dark veins winding beneath the surface like secrets waiting to break free. The cat, sensing movement, let out another fragile cry, thin and desperate, carrying across the silent winter landscape. Henry's eyes filled with tears and he blinked hard, willing his courage to match the ferocity burning in his chest. He imagined Marie standing beside him, placing her delicate hand on his arm, whispering that love always finds a way. A gust of wind swept through the trees, rattling the branches like bones, as if urging him to hurry before it was too late. He swallowed, the taste of fear and adrenaline bitter on his tongue, feeling older and younger all at once. The ice glistened before him, beautiful and deadly, and he wondered if it could truly hold his weight. Could he be the hero this tiny creature so desperately needed? Or would he only add his name to the list of tragedies winter claimed? His breath grew ragged as he stepped forward again, each inch feeling like a step closer to both salvation and danger. He paused, trembling, as a deep groan rolled beneath the ice, sending shivers up his spine and into his very bones. The sound was low and mournful, like the lake itself was crying, warning him to turn back while he still could. Henry glanced over his shoulder, hoping someone else might appear, someone stronger, younger, braver than him. But the park was deserted, swallowed in snow and silence, leaving only him and the shivering cat trapped in a life-or-death dance. His mind raced, torn between the haunting memories of Marie's voice and the very real threat of plunging into the freezing depths. Yet as he looked at the cat, tiny paws splayed out in terror, his resolve hardened like the ice beneath his feet. He thought of how Marie had believed that every soul mattered, no matter how small or fragile, and he felt her spirit guiding him still. Could he really turn away, knowing the cat's fate would be sealed if he didn't act? The fear clawed at him, but a deeper instinct roared even louder, a force of love he'd almost forgotten he still possessed. Henry took another breath and another step, as the ice moaned ominously beneath his weight. And then it happened. But just as Henry inched forward, a flash of orange and white darted out from the trees, and what happened next would change everything, leaving Henry questioning whether miracles truly exist. Out of the snow-laden pines shot a figure so unexpected that Henry's heart nearly stopped, for it wasn't a person, but a dog. Lean, powerful, with fur the color of autumn leaves and eyes bright as amber. Its paws barely seemed to touch the snow as it bounded toward the ice, muscles rippling beneath a thick winter coat that glistened under the pale sun. Henry felt his breath catch in his throat, torn between panic that another animal would fall victim to the lake's fragile surface and wonder at the dog's unshakable focus. The cat let out another pitiful wail, trembling on a slab of ice that shifted dangerously under its tiny weight, threatening to fracture at any moment. The dog skidded to a halt at the water's edge, chest heaving, ears pricked forward, as though calculating every inch between safety and peril. Henry opened his mouth to shout, but no words came out, his voice choked by the icy wind and the pounding of his heart. The dog took a single step onto the ice, testing it gingerly, claws scraping, eyes locked on the stranded kitten with unwavering determination. Time seemed to slow, every sound muffled except for the distant creaks of the shifting ice and the ragged breaths of man and animal alike. The world shrank down to that thin layer of glass, and the life balanced so precariously upon it, hanging between rescue and tragedy. Could a creature like this truly understand what it was doing and risk its own life for another so small and helpless? Because what happened next will redefine what you believe animals are capable of, and might just remind you that miracles can come on four paws, wearing courage like a shining cloak. Henry's eyes filled with tears as he watched the dog edge forward, pressing its weight carefully, pausing with each tiny movement. The wind ripped around them, whistling through bare branches and scattering powdery snow across the glassy ice like sugar on a cake. The cat's cries had grown softer now, weaker, as though exhaustion and cold were pulling it closer to a silent, icy sleep. Henry's chest squeezed painfully as he thought of Marie's gentle hands, her voice urging him to believe in goodness, even when the world felt cruel. He took an involuntary step forward, but the ice cracked sharply beneath his boot, snapping him back like a slap to the face. He froze, paralyzed, watching as the dog continued its slow, perilous crawl, tail held stiff for balance, eyes blazing with purpose. Every inch the dog moved seemed like a triumph over nature itself, defying the deadly pull of the freezing lake. Henry found himself whispering under his breath as though praying, begging the ice to hold, to stay strong for just a few more seconds. Could this animal truly save the cat where he, a grown man, could not? How was it possible that the fate of two souls, and perhaps Henry's own battered heart, rested on a dog's slender shoulders? A shudder ran through the ice as the dog inched closer, pressing low to the surface, paws spread wide to distribute its weight. Henry felt sweat prickling under his heavy coat despite the biting cold, each second stretching like a lifetime. He wanted to scream, to call for help, but there was no one else, just the wind howling and the echo of his own thundering pulse. The dog stopped, barely 3 feet from the trembling kitten, its breath steaming in the frigid air as it locked eyes with the tiny creature. Something passed between them, a look of silent understanding, a bond deeper than words, as if they'd agreed upon a secret mission of survival. The cat blinked slowly, its whiskers stiff with frost, and let out a small broken meow, reaching a paw toward the dog. Henry felt a sob building in his chest, raw and unstoppable, as he realized he was witnessing something pure and extraordinary. He could almost hear Marie's voice whispering that love finds a way no matter the odds, no matter how fragile the bridge between life and loss. Could it be that the universe had sent this dog, this guardian angel in fur, to save not just the kitten, but him as well? The dog lowered its head, inching even closer, muscles trembling as the ice beneath it let out another ominous groan. Henry gasped as the dog suddenly lunged forward, snapping the kitten's scruff gently between its teeth, lifting it clear off the ice in one smooth, powerful motion. The cat went limp, either from fear or trust, dangling like a rag doll as the dog began the slow, careful back towards solid ground. Each step seemed an eternity, the ice wailing in protest, hairline fractures spiderwebbing under the dog's paws. Henry felt his entire world balancing on those slender legs, every second a test of faith, hope, and sheer willpower. He didn't dare move, barely dared to breathe as the dog backed away, muscles quivering, carrying its precious cargo like a treasure. Snow whirled around them in a frantic dance, blurring the edges of the scene until it felt like a moment out of a dream. The cat gave a tiny, muffled cry, as though sensing safety drawing near, eyes fluttering half-closed with exhaustion. Henry's heart leapt into his throat, beating so hard it felt like it might burst as the dog finally reached the shoreline. Could this be real? That a creature of instinct and fur had risked everything to save another life? Yet just as relief began to flood Henry's veins, a sharp crack split the air behind them, louder than a gunshot, and his eyes flew wide in horror. For behind the heroic dog, the ice had begun collapsing into dark, gaping water, and in that instant, Henry knew this rescue might still come at an unthinkable cost. The sound of the ice breaking was like thunder rolling across the lake, deep and violent, shaking Henry right to the marrow of his bones. Water surged up through jagged cracks, black as midnight, swallowing the shards of ice that splintered and sank with a hiss. Henry's eyes flew to the dog, who had just made it back to solid ground, the kitten still held gently between its strong jaws. But behind them, the hole in the ice grew wider, spreading like a deadly wound, and the cold wind seemed to howl in triumph. The dog turned its head, staring back at the lake with an almost human expression of fear and confusion, ears pinned flat against its skull. Henry rushed forward, arms outstretched, driven by an instinct older than fear, older than caution, powered only by love and gratitude. His boots slipped on the snow, his knees nearly buckling under him, but he pushed onward, desperate to reach the brave animal and the fragile life it carried. The cat, eyes barely open, gave a faint mewl, and Henry's chest felt like it might explode with the weight of everything he was feeling. Could this truly be happening? A dog risking death, a man discovering hope again, all bound together by one tiny, shivering creature? Or was he trapped in a dream, destined to wake up and find himself alone again in the silence of his empty house? Because the next few moments would reveal a bond so fierce, so profound, it might just heal more than one broken soul and remind us all what true courage looks like. Henry dropped to his knees beside the dog, hands trembling as he reached out, afraid he might scare the animal away. But the dog didn't bolt or snarl. Instead, it stared into Henry's eyes as though it knew exactly who he was and why he was there. Gently, the dog lowered the kitten into Henry's waiting arms, releasing its hold so carefully that not a single claw caught on its fur. Henry gathered the tiny creature close to his chest, feeling its frail heartbeat fluttering like a trapped bird, warm and desperate. The cat smelled faintly of ice and fear, but it was alive, and that simple miracle sent tears streaming down Henry's weathered cheeks. The dog stood close, pressing its body against Henry's side, as though determined to shield them both from the icy wind and the yawning lake behind them. Henry buried his face in the kitten's fur, whispering thanks over and over, words tumbling out in a rush of relief and sorrow and joy. Could any of this have happened without this courageous animal who'd leapt into danger without a second thought? And was it possible that Marie herself had somehow sent this dog to guide him back to life, to love, to hope? Henry lifted his gaze to the dog's warm amber eyes, and for the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe again. The dog whined softly, nudging Henry's arm, eyes flicking between him and the hole in the ice as though still worried about unseen threats. Henry followed its gaze, shivering at the sight of the black water swirling where the ice had vanished, a stark reminder of how close they'd all come to tragedy. He felt a rush of gratitude so fierce it almost hurt, as though his heart had been cracked wide open and sunlight was finally pouring in. The kitten shifted weakly in his arms, letting out a tiny sneeze, its whiskers quivering as it peered up at him with round gold eyes. Henry let out a wet laugh, half sob, clutching the little creature closer, overwhelmed by the fragile spark of life pulsing against his chest. The dog sat beside him, tail wagging in cautious sweeps, pressing its weight into his leg like a silent reassurance that all was well, for now. How could he ever repay such bravery, such unconditional love, from a creature who owed him nothing at all? And why did it feel like his entire world, his grief, his loneliness, his frozen heart, was slowly beginning to thaw. He glanced around the deserted park, half expecting Marie's gentle laughter to echo from the trees, as if she were there, smiling at the miracle unfolding. Could this really be the beginning of something new? Or would the weight of the past drag him back into darkness once the adrenaline faded? Henry struggled to his feet, clutching the kitten carefully, and the dog rose beside him, leaning close as though afraid to leave his side. Snow continued falling around them, soft and silent, covering the chaos of broken ice in a glittering white shroud. He glanced back at the lake, breath fogging the air, and shivered as he imagined how easily all three of them could have vanished beneath those dark waters. Instead, they were standing together, battered but alive, as if the universe had chosen mercy instead of heartbreak. Henry felt a warmth blooming in his chest, small but powerful, like the first ember of a fire rekindled after a long, bitter winter. The dog tilted its head, studying him with a look of quiet wisdom, as if waiting for him to understand some silent truth. Henry couldn't help reaching down to bury his fingers in its thick, warm fur, feeling comfort spread through him like sunlight on snow. He whispered, "Thank you," his voice breaking, knowing those two words would never be enough to express what burned inside his soul. Could this dog possibly be homeless, alone in the world just as he'd been all these months? Yet before he could wonder any further, the dog gave a sharp bark, eyes darting toward the path leading out of the park, as though urging Henry to follow. And in that moment, Henry realized the journey wasn't over yet, because the dog was leading him somewhere he never expected, and what lay ahead would change everything. Henry hesitated, clutching the kitten tighter as the dog trotted a few steps ahead, pausing to glance back at him with an urgent, expectant look. Snowflakes caught in the dog's fur, turning it into a walking sculpture of white and gold, and its breath puffed in quick, determined clouds. Henry glanced down at the kitten, whose tiny head rested against his chest, eyes drooping but still blinking weakly, as if determined to stay awake. He felt torn between wanting to rush the kitten to warmth and safety, and the magnetic pull of this mysterious dog, who seemed to have its own plan. His boots crunched in the snow as he shifted his weight, mind spinning with questions he never thought he'd ask at 62. Could an animal truly be guiding him towards something more, something he didn't even know he was searching for? He whispered Marie's name under his breath, almost afraid to speak it aloud, as though saying it might shatter the fragile spell surrounding them. Yet in the silent, snow-covered park, he felt closer to her than he had in months, as if she were woven into every breath of cold air. The dog barked again, more insistent this time, and wagged its tail in a slow, sweeping arc, as though pleading for Henry to trust it. How could he turn away from the very creature who'd performed a miracle on the ice, and might have one more miracle left to give? Because where the dog was about to lead him would reveal secrets he never knew existed, and bring healing he'd long since stopped believing was possible. Gathering his courage, Henry followed the dog across the snow-dusted path, each step echoing like a promise of something new. The trees seemed to part for them, branches arching overhead like a cathedral ceiling dusted in white, while the wind softened to a gentle hush. The dog trotted ahead with quiet certainty, pausing every few yards to make sure Henry was keeping up, eyes glowing in the dim winter light. Henry felt the kitten shift in his arms, pressing closer for warmth, its tiny purr vibrating faintly against his chest, fragile yet stubbornly alive. He glanced up at the sky, where pale sunbeams broke through thinning clouds, washing the world in gold, as though blessing their unlikely pilgrimage. The air smelled clean and sharp, carrying the faint scent of pine and distant wood smoke, and for a moment, Henry felt like he was stepping into another life entirely. Could it be that all along, he'd needed saving just as much as the kitten, and that this dog was the bridge back to his own humanity? He tried to imagine telling Marie about all this, about the dog, the ice, the kitten, and realized she'd probably just smile and say, "I told you miracles happen." Henry blinked back fresh tears, breathing deeply, trying to steady the trembling in his chest as hope began to flicker like a tiny flame inside him. And as the dog led them around a bend in the path, Henry braced himself for whatever lay ahead, heart pounding like he was a boy again. They emerged into a clearing where a small, weathered wooden shelter stood nestled among snow-laden pines, smoke curling gently from a chimney. Henry blinked in surprise because he'd never noticed the cabin before, even though he'd walked these trails countless times over the years. The dog bounded forward, barking with joy, and pawed at the cabin door, glancing back at Henry as if to say, "This is where you need to be." Henry approached cautiously, feeling like he was stepping through a dream, the kitten still tucked safe in his coat, radiating a fragile warmth. From inside the cabin came a faint glow of lamplight, soft and golden, spilling through the frosted windows like a beacon. He reached out with a trembling hand and pushed the door open, his heart thudding so loud he could barely hear the hinges creak. The scent of wood smoke and something faintly floral washed over him, wrapping around him like a memory of Marie's favorite perfume. Inside the cabin was cozy, simple but beautiful, with thick rugs, shelves of books, and a crackling fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. Could it be that someone was waiting for him here? Or was this cabin itself the miracle the dog wanted him to find? Yet before he could ponder further, a gentle voice called out from the shadows, soft as a lullaby, "Henry, is that you?" Henry froze, unable to breathe, as a woman stepped into the light, elderly, kind-eyed, with silver hair and a smile so warm it melted the winter right out of the room. She wore a thick knitted sweater and held out her hands, palms up, eyes shining with gentle curiosity, and something Henry couldn't quite name. The dog bounded over to her, tail wagging furiously, pressing its face against her legs like a child reunited with its mother. Henry stared in disbelief, clutching the kitten to his chest as if it were the only thing anchoring him to reality. The woman stepped closer, eyes dropping to the shivering kitten, then lifting back to Henry's face, her gaze full of tenderness. "I've been looking for that little one for days," she said softly. "And for you too, Henry. Though you may not know it yet." Henry swallowed hard. Words caught in his throat as memories, grief, and wonder crashed through him like a rising tide. Could it be possible that this woman, this dog, this kitten, were all part of some larger plan to guide him out of his darkness? The dog settled at Henry's feet, eyes bright and proud, as though certain it had fulfilled its sacred mission. And in that quiet cabin, with snow falling outside and warmth blooming within, Henry felt for the first time in months that he might finally be home. Because sometimes it takes a dog, a kitten, and a stranger's kindness to remind us that life isn't over yet, and that even the coldest winters can give way to spring,